The haunting whistle of wind across the Montana plains carried the echo of Eleanor Blackwood's screams on the night she was assaulted, but it was the quiet that followed which truly terrified the townsfolk of Redemption Creek. The year was 1876, and the West was still untamed, a place where justice often came not from law books, but from the barrel of a gun or the end of a rope. In Eleanor's case, justice hadn't come at all. "She'll never let a man near her again," Pearl Wilson declared from behind the counter of her general store, a week after the incident. "Not after what that devil Silas Moran did." The assembled women nodded in solemn agreement. Eleanor had once been the town's vibrant schoolteacher, her emerald eyes sparkling with intelligence and warmth. Now she was a shadow, haunting the edges of her own life, jumping at sudden movements and keeping her gaze firmly fixed on the ground. "Shame, too," Mabel Johnson added, lowering her voice. "Such a pretty young thing. Only 22. Now she'll likely die alone in that cabin of hers." "It's probably for the best," Pearl concluded with a shake of her head. "Some wounds never heal proper." Outside the store, Quentin Hayes sat on his horse, having overheard the entire conversation through the open window. His jaw clenched beneath his neatly trimmed beard, weathered hands tightening on the reins. At 30 years old, Quentin had seen his share of cruelty, both during the war and in his years as a ranch hand. Something about this particular injustice lit a fire in his blood. "You reckon they're right, Thunder?" he asked his chestnut stallion, who merely snorted in response. "Yeah, I don't much like folks deciding another person's fate either." Quentin had only been in Redemption Creek for 3 days, arriving to deliver a herd of cattle to the Wilson Ranch before continuing northward. He'd planned to leave the following morning, but the conversation he'd just overheard gave him pause. He'd heard about the attack. Of course, in a town this small, news traveled faster than a prairie fire. Silas Moran had fled after the assault, and the sheriff had been mysteriously ineffective in pursuing him. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes," a timid voice called from the boardwalk. Quentin turned to see Reverend Miller's wife approaching, clutching a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Yes, madam. I couldn't help but notice you listening." She glanced around nervously. "I'm taking some bread to Miss Blackwood today. She doesn't come to town anymore. Would you mind riding alongside me? The path to her cabin goes through some lonely country." Quentin nodded, tipping his hat. "It would be my honor, Mrs. Miller." The ride to Eleanor's cabin took them along a winding creek, the water reflecting the pale blue sky above. Mrs. Miller filled the silence with nervous chatter, explaining that Eleanor had come west from Boston 3 years prior to teach in their little school. "She's educated, you know. Went to a ladies' college back east. Could have married well there, but wanted adventure." Mrs. Miller sighed. "She certainly found it, though not the kind anyone would wish for." "What happened to the man who hurt her?" Quentin asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Silas Moran?" Mrs. Miller's lips thinned. "He's gone, but not far enough if you ask me. Word is he's in Black Pine, barely 30 miles north. Sheriff Doyle says there's not enough evidence to arrest him." She sniffed disapprovingly. "Though everyone knows what happened." Quentin remained silent, processing this information as they approached a small cabin nestled among a stand of cottonwoods. It was modest but well built, with a neat garden patch and chickens scratching in a small pen. Smoke curled from the chimney, the only sign that someone lived within its walls. "Miss Blackwood," Mrs. Miller called as they approached. "It's Martha Miller. I've brought you some fresh bread." The cabin door opened slowly, revealing a slender woman with copper hair pulled back in a severe bun. Even at a distance, Quentin could see the wariness in her posture, the way she held herself as if expecting a blow. She wore a high-necked blue dress, simple and practical, and her eyes widened with alarm when she spotted him. "It's all right," Mrs. Miller hastened to assure her. "This is Mr. Hayes. He was kind enough to escort me." Eleanor nodded stiffly but didn't speak. Her gaze remained fixed on him, wary as a cornered animal. "I'll wait here, madam," Quentin said, dismounting but staying near his horse, giving her space. Mrs. Miller bustled forward, handing over the basket and engaging Eleanor in hushed conversation. Quentin politely averted his eyes, studying the property instead. It was well maintained, but showed signs of strain. The fence needed repair in places, and the woodpile was precariously low for this time of year. When Mrs. Miller returned to him, Her expression was troubled. "She's not doing well," she whispered. "Barely eating. Won't come back to teach. Says she can't face the children's parents." "Has she no family to help her?" "None. She's entirely alone." Mrs. Miller glanced back at the cabin. "I worry what will become of her when winter comes." Quentin nodded, his decision already made, though he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge it. "We should head back before dusk, madam." As they turned to leave, Quentin felt eyes upon him and glanced back. Eleanor stood in the doorway, one hand pressed against the frame as if for support. For just a moment, their gazes met, and he saw not just fear in her eyes, but a flicker of something else, a dying ember of the spirit she must have once possessed. He tipped his hat respectfully before turning away, knowing that whatever his next move would be, it would not involve leaving Redemption Creek just yet. The following morning found Quentin at the livery stable, arranging to board Thunder for longer than anticipated. The stable hand, a teenager named Billy, eyed him curiously. "Thought you were heading north today," the boy remarked. "Change of plans," Quentin replied, not elaborating further. "You know of any work around town? I find myself in need of employment." Billy scratched his head. "Well, Mr. Wilson's always looking for good hands at his ranch. Or there's the sawmill. They lost 2 men to mining fever last month. I'll look into both." "Much obliged." Quentin handed the boy an extra coin, which disappeared into Billy's pocket with practiced speed. "If you don't mind my asking," Billy ventured, "what's keeping you in our little slice of nowhere?" Quentin considered the question. "Let's just say I've got unfinished business." His first stop was the sheriff's office, a modest wooden building with a sign that had seen better days. Inside, he found Sheriff Doyle, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache, dozing behind his desk. "Sheriff," Quentin said, closing the door loudly enough to wake the man. Doyle startled, blinking rapidly. "Help you, stranger?" "Name's Quentin Hayes. Just arrived in town." He remained standing, studying the lawman with a careful eye. "Thought I should introduce myself, seeing as I plan to stay a while." The sheriff nodded absently. "That's so?" "Looking for work, among other things." Quentin leaned against the doorframe. "I heard about what happened to the schoolteacher. Terrible business." Doyle's expression darkened. "Town gossip finds you quick, I see. Hard to miss when it's on everyone's lips. They say you know who did it." "Allegations ain't evidence, Hayes." The sheriff's tone turned defensive. "I can't just ride into another town and arrest a man based on hearsay. Even when the hearsay comes from the victim herself." Doyle's eyes narrowed. "You asking as a concerned citizen or something else?" "Just trying to understand how things work around here." Quentin straightened. "Where I come from, we don't let men who hurt women walk free." "And where exactly is that?" "All over. Served with the Union Army, then Texas, Wyoming, Dakota Territory." Quentin kept his tone casual. "Picked up notions of justice along the way." "Well, this ain't your territory," Doyle warned. "Redemption Creek handles its own problems. Doesn't seem like you're handling this one at all," Quentin observed quietly. The sheriff stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "You looking to cause trouble, Hayes? Because I can have you on your way by sundown." Quentin smiled thinly. "Just making conversation, Sheriff. Good day to you." He left the office with a clearer understanding of the situation. Sheriff Doyle was either incompetent or complicit. Neither option boded well for Eleanor Blackwood, receiving justice through official channels. His next stop was the Wilson Ranch, where he secured work as a ranch hand. James Wilson was a fair employer who asked few questions beyond Quentin's experience with cattle. By sunset, Quentin had arranged lodging in the bunkhouse and established himself as part of the crew. "You picked an odd time to arrive," Wilson commented as they walked back from the corrals. "Most drifters come through in spring or fall, not the dead of summer." "I follow opportunity, not seasons," Quentin replied easily. Wilson nodded appreciatively. "A man who makes his own way. I respect that. Just so you know, we've got a dance coming up Saturday next. Town tradition before harvest gets into full swing. Good way to meet folks if you're planning to put down roots." "I'll keep it in mind," Quentin said. Those social gatherings were far from his priorities. Over the next 2 weeks, Quentin established a routine. He worked hard during the day, earning respect from the other hands. In the evenings, he made a point of visiting the general store, the saloon, and other gathering places, listening more than talking. He learned that Silas Moran was the nephew of Gregory Moran, who owned the largest cattle operation north of Redemption Creek. The Morans had business ties with several prominent citizens, including, suspiciously, Sheriff Doyle. Most importantly, he learned about Eleanor. Before the attack, she had been beloved by her students, respected for her intelligence, and admired for her independence. She had turned down several suitors, preferring her autonomy to marriage. The assault had occurred when she was returning home from a school event, with Silas Moran waylaying her on the path to her cabin. She fought like a wildcat, Ada Thompson, the seamstress, told him. That's why Silas had those scratches on his face when he came slinking through town the next morning. Claimed he'd had a run-in with a branch while riding at night, but we all knew better. Why would he do such a thing? Quentin asked, careful to keep his tone conversational rather than revealing the fury building inside him. Ada lowered her voice. She rejected his advances at the spring social. Publicly, men like Silas don't take humiliation well, especially from women they think are beneath them. Armed with this knowledge, Quentin began riding past Eleanor's cabin every few days, always keeping a respectful distance. Sometimes he would leave small offerings, a stack of firewood, a brace of rabbits he'd hunted, or vegetables from the Wilson garden, without making his presence known. He wanted her to know someone was looking out for her, but he had no intention of forcing his company upon her. On his fifth such visit, as he was securing a package of coffee to her porch railing, the cabin door opened. Quentin froze, then slowly turned to face Eleanor, who stood in the doorway clutching a shotgun. "Miss Blackwood," he said quietly, removing his hat. "I apologize for startling you. Why are you leaving things?" She demanded, her voice hoarse, as if from disuse. The shotgun didn't waver in her hands. "Thought you might have need of them," he answered honestly. "I don't accept charity," she said, chin raised defiantly despite the fear evident in her eyes. "It's not charity, madam. It's neighborliness. We're not neighbors. I don't even know your name." "Quentin Hayes. I'm working at the Wilson Ranch." He remained perfectly still, hands visible. "I escorted Mrs. Miller here a few weeks back." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "I remember." "That doesn't explain why you're leaving supplies on my porch like I'm some object of pity." "No pity, Miss Blackwood. Just respect." He gestured to the coffee. "That's payment, actually. I heard you've got the best apple trees in the county, and I was hoping to trade for some come harvest time." She studied him suspiciously, the shotgun lowering slightly. "That's months away. I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. Eleanor's brow furrowed, clearly unsure what to make of him. Most men would be afraid of a woman pointing a shotgun at them. Most men haven't seen what I have. His voice remained gentle. "I respect your right to protect yourself, Miss Blackwood. I'll leave now if you wish." She seemed taken aback by his calm acceptance. After a long moment, she lowered the shotgun completely. "The coffee can stay," she said finally. "But I don't need help." Quentin nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "As you say, good day to you, Miss Blackwood." He turned to leave, mounting thunder with unhurried movements. "Mr. Hayes," she called when he was a few yards away. He turned in the saddle, waiting. "The apples will be ready in September." Her voice was stronger now, with a hint of the schoolteacher she had once been. "They make excellent pies." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Quentin tipped his hat and rode away, a small smile playing at his lips. The ember he'd seen in her eyes was still there, buried but not extinguished. Over the following weeks, a cautious pattern emerged. Quentin would ride by her property, sometimes stopping to repair a fence post or clear debris from the creek that supplied her water. Eleanor would watch from a distance, occasionally emerging to exchange a few words. Each time, she seemed less frightened, though still guarded. On his eighth visit, he found her struggling to chop wood, her movements awkward and inefficient. "May I help?" he called from a safe distance. She startled, then straightened, brushing hair from her flushed face. "I can manage." "I've no doubt," he agreed. "But I've got experience with that particular task that might save you some effort." Eleanor hesitated, then stepped back from the chopping block. "Very well." Quentin dismounted, approaching slowly. He took the axe she reluctantly offered, careful not to touch her hand. Working methodically, he split log after log, aware of her watchful gaze. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Doing what precisely?" "This." She gestured vaguely. "Coming here. Helping." Not pushing. Quentin resumed chopping, considering his answer carefully. I believe everyone deserves to feel safe in their own skin, Miss Blackwood, to make their own choices. The town thinks I'm damaged beyond repair, she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, that I'll never let a man near me again. He set down the axe, turning to face her fully. With all due respect to the good people of Redemption Creek, that's not their decision to make. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. The only person who gets to decide what you will or won't do is you, he continued quietly. And the only person who gets to determine if you're beyond repair is you. And what do you think, Mr. Hayes? She challenged, a spark of her former spirit visible. I think you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, he answered honestly. Including yourself. She looked away, blinking rapidly. You don't know me. I know enough, he said. I know you came west on your own. I know you educated children when others might have chosen an easier path. I know you've survived something terrible and you're still standing. Eleanor remained silent, her arms wrapped around herself as if for protection. I also know, Quentin added softly, that I'll only ever touch you if you want me to. Not before. Not ever. Her head snapped up, eyes searching his face for deception. Finding none, she swallowed hard. Why would you say such a thing? Because it's true. He picked up the axe again, returning to his task. And because sometimes people need to hear what should be obvious. They worked in silence after that, Eleanor gathering the split wood as he chopped. When the pile was substantial, Quentin returned the axe to her woodshed. Thank you, she said as he prepared to leave, the words coming reluctantly. He tipped his hat. My pleasure, Miss Blackwood. Eleanor, she corrected quietly. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor, he repeated, smiling. Until next time. As summer progressed into early autumn, the town took notice of Quentin's regular visits to Eleanor's cabin. Gossip spread quickly, though the nature of it varied widely. He's just feeling sorry for her, some said. He doesn't know what he's getting into, others warned. It's indecent, the more judgmental citizens declared. A single man calling on a woman with her reputation. Quentin ignored the talk, continuing his visits. Sometimes they would sit on her porch, a respectable distance between them, and talk about books or his travels or the changing seasons. Eleanor gradually revealed more of herself, her childhood in Boston, her dreams of adventure that had brought her west, her love of teaching. I miss the children, she admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Teaching was. It gave me purpose. Why not go back, he asked. She shook her head. The parents wouldn't want me near their children now. I'm tainted. That's nonsense, Quentin said firmly. You're the same exceptional teacher you always were. What happened to you doesn't change that. The world doesn't work that way, Quentin, she sighed, using his given name as she had begun to do in recent weeks. Women carry the burden of men's actions. Only because we allow it to be so, he countered. Things can change if good people stand firm. She offered a sad smile. You're an idealist. I prefer stubborn, he replied, drawing a small laugh from her, a sound that had become less rare during their visits. The harvest dance approached, and to Quentin's surprise, Eleanor mentioned it during one of their conversations. Will you attend? She asked, trying to sound casual. I hadn't planned to, he admitted. Such gatherings aren't really to my taste. Oh, she looked down at her hands. I was considering. That is, I thought perhaps. Quentin's heart quickened. Are you asking if I would escort you, Eleanor? She met his gaze, vulnerability and determination warring in her expression. Yes, if you would be willing. It would be my honor, he said sincerely. But are you certain? People will talk. People already talk, she said with unexpected fierceness. Let them. I can't hide forever. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, with stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. Quentin arrived at Eleanor's cabin at the appointed time, wearing his best shirt and a freshly polished pair of boots. When she opened the door, he momentarily lost the ability to speak. Eleanor wore a deep green dress that complemented her copper hair, which she had arranged in an elegant twist adorned with a simple ribbon. The dress was modest by design, but revealed the graceful curve of her neck and the delicate structure of her collarbones. You look beautiful, he said when he found his voice. A blush colored her cheeks. Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself. The ride to town was quiet, tension evident in Eleanor's rigid posture. Halfway there, she suddenly asked him to stop. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, her hands trembling slightly. "It's been months since I've been in town. Everyone will be staring." Quentin turned in his saddle to face her. "We can turn back right now if that's what you want. Or we can arrive, make a brief appearance, and leave if it becomes too much." "And if I panic?" she whispered. "Then we leave immediately, no questions asked." He held her gaze steadily. "I'll be right beside you the entire time, Eleanor. But only if you want me to be." She drew a deep breath, then nodded. "Let's continue." The town hall was decorated with autumn flowers and lanterns, filled with the sounds of fiddle music and laughter. When Quentin and Eleanor entered, a momentary hush fell over the crowd before conversation resumed, now punctuated with whispers and sidelong glances. Martha Miller was the first to approach them, her face alight with genuine pleasure. "Eleanor, how wonderful to see you. You look absolutely lovely." Other well-wishers followed, parents of former students, neighbors, shopkeepers, their greetings ranging from warmly sincere to awkwardly polite. Throughout it all, Quentin remained at Eleanor's side, a steady presence without being overbearing. "Would you care to dance?" he asked when the initial flurry of greetings subsided. Eleanor hesitated. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that." "We could just watch for a while," he suggested. She nodded gratefully, and they found seats along the wall where they could observe the festivities. Quentin procured punch for them both, careful to maintain the respectful distance that had characterized their interactions. As the evening progressed, Eleanor visibly relaxed, even laughing at the antics of some of the more enthusiastic dancers. When a slower tune began, she turned to Quentin with determination in her eyes. "I think I'd like to try dancing now," she said quietly. Quentin stood, offering his hand. "I should warn you, I have 2 left feet. Fortunately, I was quite good at dancing before." She didn't finish the sentence, but squared her shoulders. "I can lead if necessary." He chuckled. "I would follow your lead anywhere, Eleanor Blackwood." On the dance floor, Quentin was acutely aware of their physical proximity, careful to hold her lightly, his hand barely touching her waist. Eleanor's body was tense at first, but as they moved together, she gradually eased into the rhythm. "You're not as terrible as you claimed," she remarked, a small smile playing at her lips. "I have excellent motivation to avoid stepping on your toes," he replied. They completed 2 dances before Eleanor signaled she needed a respite. As they made their way back to their seats, Sheriff Doyle intercepted them, his expression unreadable. "Miss Blackwood," he said with a curt nod. "Surprised to see you here." "Sheriff," Eleanor acknowledged stiffly. "Hayes," Doyle continued, eyeing Quentin with suspicion. "You've been making quite a name for yourself, riding out to Miss Blackwood's place regular-like." "Have I?" Quentin replied mildly. "I wasn't aware my comings and goings were of interest to the law. Everything in my town is my business." Doyle's tone hardened. "Especially when it involves interfering with ongoing investigations." Eleanor's hand tightened on Quentin's arm. "There is no investigation, Sheriff. You made that quite clear months ago." "Now, Miss Blackwood, if you'll excuse us," Quentin interrupted smoothly. "We were just about to get some air." He guided Eleanor toward the exit, feeling Doyle's glare burning into his back. Outside, Eleanor drew a shuddering breath, her composure cracking. "I knew this was a mistake," she said, her voice strained. "Nothing has changed. He still won't do anything about Silas." Quentin gently led her to a bench beneath an elm tree, far enough from the hall to afford privacy. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you." She looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. "What is it?" "I didn't come to Redemption Creek by accident," he admitted. "I was passing through, but I stayed because of what happened to you." "I don't understand." Quentin chose his next words carefully. "Before the war, I had a sister. Her name was Rosalie. She was attacked by a man who was never brought to justice because he was from a powerful family. She couldn't live with what happened to her." Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. "Oh, Quentin, when I heard your story, I couldn't right away," he continued. "Not again. Not when I might be able to help." "Is that why you've been so careful with me? Because of your sister?" He shook his head. "No, that's because of who you are and what you deserve. Every person deserves to choose who touches them and how." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "What happened to the man who hurt your sister?" Quentin's expression darkened. He met with an unfortunate accident after I returned from the war. I see. She studied his face. And is that what you plan for Silas Moran? I plan to see justice done, he answered honestly. One way or another. Not if it means you hanging for murder, Eleanor said fiercely. I won't have that on my conscience. There are other ways, Quentin assured her. Legal ways. But the sheriff won't help. Then we'll find someone who will. Determination replaced the fear in her expression. I won't hide anymore, Quentin. I want my life back. He felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Take me home, she requested softly. I've had enough excitement for one evening. The ride back to Eleanor's cabin was companionable, the tension from earlier dissipated by their candid conversation. When they arrived, Quentin helped her down from her horse, careful as always to touch her only as necessary. Thank you for tonight, she said, standing on her porch steps. For everything. It was my pleasure, he replied sincerely. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped forward and placed her hand lightly on his forearm. It was the first time she had initiated contact between them, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. Quentin, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I would like you to kiss me goodnight. His heart hammered in his chest. Are you certain? She nodded, vulnerable yet resolute. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. With infinite gentleness, Quentin leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss as light as a butterfly's wing. Eleanor's breath caught, her hand tightening on his arm momentarily before she pulled back. Good night, she whispered, her eyes bright in the moonlight. Good night, Eleanor, he replied, watching as she disappeared into her cabin. As he rode back toward the ranch, Quentin's mind raced with conflicting emotions: joy at Eleanor's trust in him, determination to help her reclaim her life, and a growing concern about Sheriff Doyle's hostility. Something would have to be done, and soon. The opportunity came the following week, when James Wilson received word that the territorial marshal would be passing through Redemption Creek on his way to Helena. Quentin seized his chance, requesting time off to speak with the lawman. Marshal Jenkins, Quentin said, introducing himself at the small hotel where the marshal had taken a room. My name is Quentin Hayes. I need to speak with you about a matter of justice that's been overlooked in this town. The marshal, a weathered man with keen eyes, gestured to a chair. Speak plainly, Hayes. I've got no patience for beating around the bush. For the next hour, Quentin laid out the facts of Eleanor's case, including Sheriff Doyle's suspicious reluctance to pursue Silas Moran and the connections between the Moran family and local officials. He presented witness accounts he'd gathered and a written statement from Eleanor herself, which she had prepared at his suggestion. Marshal Jenkins listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. When Quentin finished, the marshal nodded slowly. I've heard whispers about Doyle before, he admitted. Never anything substantial enough to act on. This, however, is different. He tapped Eleanor's statement. The victim is willing to testify? She is, Quentin confirmed. She's reclaiming her courage day by day. Good. I'll ride to Black Pine tomorrow and bring in Moran for questioning. In the meantime, keep this conversation between us. Doyle doesn't need any warning. Quentin stood, extending his hand. Thank you, Marshal. Jenkins shook it firmly. Don't thank me yet. Justice isn't guaranteed, especially when money and influence are involved. But I'll do my damnedest. True to his word, Marshal Jenkins departed for Black Pine the following morning. Quentin returned to his duties at the Wilson Ranch, saying nothing to Eleanor about the developments. He didn't want to raise her hopes prematurely. 2 days later, as Quentin was mending a fence line, he spotted a cloud of dust on the road leading to town. Squinting against the sun, he made out several riders, Marshal Jenkins at the lead, followed by a man with bound hands who could only be Silas Moran, and 2 deputies. Quentin immediately saddled Thunder and rode to Eleanor's cabin, arriving just as she was hanging laundry. Quentin, she called, noticing his urgent approach. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he assured her, dismounting. But Marshal Jenkins has returned from Black Pine, with Silas Moran in custody. Eleanor paled, her hands gripping the wet sheet she'd been about to hang. How? When? I spoke to the marshal, Quentin admitted. Showed him the evidence we gathered. He believed you, Eleanor. She sank onto a nearby stump, the sheet forgotten in her lap. He's going to stand trial? That's my understanding. The marshal will want your testimony. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. I'll have to face him again. Yes, Quentin said gently. But not alone. Never alone. She looked up at him, resolve hardening in her gaze. Then let's go to town. I want to see him brought in. By the time they reached Redemption Creek, a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Marshal Jenkins was addressing the townsfolk, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. Charges of assault and attempted murder, he was saying as Quentin and Eleanor approached. Sheriff Doyle has been temporarily relieved of his duties, pending an investigation into obstruction of justice. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eleanor dismounted, standing tall despite the stares turning her way. Quentin remained at her side, a silent pillar of support. Marshal Jenkins spotted them and nodded respectfully. Miss Blackwood, thank you for your written statement. I'll need to speak with you formally tomorrow, if that's acceptable. It is, she replied, her voice steady despite her white-knuckled grip on her reins. The door to the sheriff's office opened, and two deputies emerged escorting Silas Moran. The man looked considerably less imposing in handcuffs, his arrogant facade cracked by fear. When he saw Eleanor, he flinched visibly. For a long moment, Eleanor simply stared at him, her body rigid. Then, to Quentin's surprise, she stepped forward. I am not afraid of you anymore, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. And I will see justice done. Silas said nothing, his gaze dropping to the ground as the deputies led him back inside. Eleanor turned away, her composure intact but her breathing shallow. Take me home, please, she whispered to Quentin. The days that followed were difficult but transformative. Eleanor gave her testimony to Marshal Jenkins, recounting the attack in detail for the official record. The marshal assured her that given the evidence and statements from other witnesses about Silas's scratched face and behavior, there was a strong case against him. He'll be transferred to Helena for trial, Jenkins explained. The territorial court there will be less susceptible to the Moran family's influence. Sheriff Doyle, facing his own investigation, resigned his position rather than contest the charges against him. The town council appointed a deputy named Taylor as interim sheriff, a younger man known for his straightforward approach to law enforcement. Throughout this upheaval, Quentin remained steadfast at Eleanor's side, offering support without presumption. Their relationship deepened as Eleanor gradually reclaimed her confidence. She began visiting town again, first with Quentin as escort, then occasionally on her own. When several parents approached her about resuming lessons for their children, she cautiously agreed to tutor small groups at her cabin. It's not the same as having the schoolroom, she told Quentin one evening as they sat by her fireplace, but it's a beginning. You're rebuilding, he observed. Step by step. She nodded, her gaze thoughtful as she studied him across the hearth. We both are, I think. Autumn deepened, the hills surrounding Redemption Creek ablaze with gold and crimson. Eleanor's apple trees yielded a bountiful harvest, and she made good on her promise of pies. Quentin helped her pick the fruit, their laughter carrying across the orchard as they worked side by side. These are the best apples I've ever tasted, he declared, biting into a particularly crisp specimen. Eleanor smiled, her cheeks flushed from exertion and the cool air. They're especially good this year. Perhaps they, too, are celebrating a new beginning. As they carried their baskets back to the cabin, Quentin found himself contemplating the future. His temporary position at the Wilson Ranch had extended well past its original timeline, but he had no regrets. For the first time since the war, he felt anchored, purposeful. Eleanor, he said as they reached her porch, I've been thinking. She set down her basket, turning to face him. About staying. Permanently. He watched her expression carefully. Wilson's offered me a foreman position starting next spring. I'm inclined to accept. Oh, her eyes widened slightly. That's wonderful news, Quentin. Is it? He asked quietly. I wouldn't want to presume. Eleanor took a step toward him, then another, until they stood mere inches apart. What exactly would you be presuming? That my presence here might continue to be welcome, he said, his heart beating faster at her proximity. That we might continue to build whatever this is between us. She reached up slowly, her fingers brushing his cheek with delicate precision. Your presence is very welcome, Quentin Hayes. He caught her hand gently, pressing a kiss to her palm. May I court you properly, Eleanor Blackwood? With all the respect and patience you deserve. Yes, she whispered, a smile blooming across her face. Though I suspect your patience may be tested, as I find myself growing increasingly impatient. Quentin laughed softly, drawing her closer. I'm in no hurry. We have all the time in the world. Nevertheless, she murmured, lifting her face to his. I would very much like you to kiss me now. This time, their kiss was neither hesitant nor brief. Eleanor's arms wound around his neck as she pressed herself against him, trusting him with her body in a way that humbled him profoundly. Quentin held her gently but firmly, pouring months of restrained emotion into the embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Eleanor rested her forehead against his chest. I never thought I could feel this way again, she admitted. Safe. Wanted. You are both, he assured her, stroking her hair. Always. Word reached Redemption Creek in November that Silas Moran had been convicted and sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. The news brought a palpable sense of closure to Eleanor, who celebrated by inviting her students and their families to her cabin for a small gathering. I couldn't have done this without you, she told Quentin as they prepared for the guests. You're stronger than you know, he countered. You would have found your way back eventually. She shook her head. Perhaps, but not like this. You showed me it was possible to trust again, to choose my own path forward. Speaking of paths forward, Quentin said, taking her hand, I've been looking at that parcel of land adjacent to yours, the one with the stand of pines. The old Peterson place? It's been vacant for years. Not anymore. He smiled. I purchased it yesterday. Eleanor's eyes widened. You're going to be my neighbor? If that's agreeable to you. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. It needs work, but the foundation is solid. Good bones, as they say. Very agreeable, she replied, her eyes bright with emotion. Though I admit, I had hoped someday you might be more than just a neighbor. Quentin's heart swelled. Eleanor Blackwood, are you proposing to me? She laughed, the sound free and unencumbered. Merely making my intentions known, Mr. Hayes. A lady has to maintain some semblance of propriety. He drew her into his arms, marveling at how naturally she fit there now. All earlier hesitation long since vanished. I love you, he said simply, with everything I am. And I love you, she replied, her voice steady and sure. My cowboy who understands that touch is a gift, freely given or not at all. Their guests arrived soon after, filling Eleanor's small cabin with warmth and laughter. As Quentin watched her move among them, confident and radiant, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From broken pieces, they had built something beautiful together, not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let it dictate their future. Winter came to Redemption Creek with a blanket of pristine snow and crystalline air that sparkled in the sunlight. Quentin spent his days renovating the cabin on his newly acquired land, and his evenings with Eleanor, planning their shared future. On Christmas Eve, with candles illuminating her cabin and a dusting of snow falling outside, Quentin knelt before Eleanor with a small wooden box in his hand. I had planned an elaborate speech, he admitted, but finding myself here, looking at you, words seem inadequate. Eleanor smiled, tears gathering in her eyes as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl. Eleanor Blackwood, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Yes, she answered without hesitation, extending her hand. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor drew him up for a kiss that promised a lifetime of freely chosen touches, of safety and passion in equal measure. They said I'd never let a man near me again, she whispered against his lips. Quentin smiled, cradling her face in his hands. And I said you'd never be touched again unless you wanted to be. I want to be, Eleanor assured him, her eyes bright with love and healing. By you, Quentin Hayes. Always by you. They were married in the spring of 1877, when the hills around Redemption Creek were carpeted with wildflowers. The entire town turned out for the celebration, many openly weeping at the sight of their former schoolteacher radiant in white lace, her copper hair crowned with daisies, as she pledged herself to the quiet cowboy who had helped her reclaim her life. Their home became a sanctuary not just for themselves, but for others in need. Eleanor resumed teaching full-time, converting a portion of their expanded cabin into a schoolroom. Quentin continued as Wilson's foreman while gradually building up their own small cattle operation. In the years that followed, they welcomed 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son, raising them with an unwavering commitment to respect and autonomy. Eleanor often remarked that their children would grow up understanding that love meant honoring boundaries, not testing them. "We're rewriting the story," she told Quentin on their 10th anniversary as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the twilight. "Not just for us, but for them." "The best stories," he replied, taking her hand, "are the ones we choose to write together." Eleanor leaned against him, secure in the knowledge that every touch between them had been and would always be her choice, a gift given freely, never taken, never assumed. In a world that had once betrayed her body and spirit, she had found a man who understood that true love was built on respect, patience, and the sacred right to say yes because you could also say no. "I choose you," she whispered, as she had every day since she first invited his touch. "Today and always." "And I choose you," he answered, his arms encircling her with the gentle strength that had become her harbor. Until the stars burn out. In Redemption Creek, their story became legend not because it was extraordinary, but because it should have been ordinary. A tale of healing that reminded everyone that love wasn't about possession but partnership, not about entitlement but invitation. And in time, as their children grew and the century turned, that lesson rippled outward, changing hearts and minds one story at a time, proving that even in the untamed wilderness of the American frontier, the most revolutionary act could be simply allowing another person the dignity of choice.